You ever tried to keep a dog in a bathtub? Try to wash the dog, give it a really good scrubbing? The dog resists. Woof. It's part of the reason that my dog smells the way he does. Good boy. President Obama has begun the process of cleaning up a depressingly long list of Bush administration messes. He's holding them down there in the bathtub, and there is some resistance. There's some resistance from the defenders of the messes. It is time once again for the Rachel Maddow Show's special series on President Obama's cleanup mission. We're calling it Scrub, Rinse, Repeat, because this is going to take a while. The president yesterday ordered the prison at Guantanamo and the secret network of CIA prisons around the world to be closed. Some ex-CIA officials, including at least one who was involved in enhanced interrogation techniques and detentions, applauded the changes. They don't want to be arrested for torture any more than anybody else does. Civil libertarians, of course, cheered the announcement. Those people have this thing about the rule of law. Under the executive orders that were issued, CIA's interrogators cannot question detainees using, quote, any interrogation technique or approach or any treatment related to interrogation that is not authorized by and listed in the Army Field Manual. The Army Field Manual complies with the Geneva Conventions. Yay. But in scrub, rinse, repeat terms, it looked like the new administration may have missed a spot. When the president announced a task force to study the effectiveness of the techniques in the Army Field Manual to determine whether it really meets the CIA's needs, opponents of torture policy had sort of a Pavlovian reaction. Wait, that sounds like a loophole. If you're banning torture, just ban torture for the CIA and for everybody, right? Well, today we got some clarification on that issue that I would call more scrubbing of Bush administration messes. A senior Obama administration official who spoke on condition of anonymity told the Washington Post, quote, "We're not talking about different techniques." And speaking to the Los Angeles Times, quote, "This is not a secret annex that allows us to bring the enhanced interrogation techniques back. It's not." Okay, that is the right thing to say. Some other reassurance, though, came from Senator Dianne Feinstein today, who chairs the House Intelligence Committee. According to the New York Times, Senator Feinstein will continue to try to pass legislation that specifically limits CIA interrogations to the techniques described in the Army Field Manual. That has three big implications. Number one, a law, in some ways, is harder to overturn than an executive fiat. The next president can't necessarily just change it back. Number two, it settles the issue of torture in a principled, unsecret, simple, easily explainable way, the way it used to be settled before things got really weird and bad about this issue during the Bush administration. And three, it signals that Senator Feinstein herself has found her sea legs on the issue of torture. The senator has come under some unflattering scrutiny in places like this show for her ambiguous statements in the past about the legality of torture and for not fighting hard enough against President Bush's installation of the mess that President Obama now has to fix in the intelligence world. But on this, Senator Feinstein is pushing forward in a direct and clear way. So there was other resistance to the president's ordering of the Guantanamo shutdown today. It was pegged to news that a Saudi national named Saeed al-Shiri, seen in this recent video, was released from Guantanamo in September 2007, and he is now believed to be a leader in al-Qaeda's operations in Yemen. And the resistance said, see, we can't let terrorists go. We can't close the Guantanamo. And in the press, the Associated Press, for example, said, quote, al-Shiri's case highlights the complexity of Obama's decision to shut down the detention center. Let's wash this one off a little bit here. Number one, Guantanamo was open when this guy became the number 2 al-Qaeda guy in Yemen. Number two, it was the Bush administration that released him. And why? Could it be that he couldn't be prosecuted because he had been picked up through a system that wasn't exactly legal and interrogated through means that weren't exactly producing admissible evidence? Possibly. Maybe closing Guantanamo isn't the problem. Maybe keeping it open really is. What we have here is a conspicuously timed news item convenient to resisting a good scrubbing of a big bad Bush administration event. Will this become a regular pattern as the cleanup continues? Joining us now is Colonel Larry Wilkerson, retired U.S. Army colonel and former Chief of Staff to U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell. Mr. Wilkerson, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Good to be here, Rachel, and you've got to ask me a question about DepSecDef Bill Lynn and what I think.
Tell me, what do you think?
I think the graveyards of the world are full of indispensable men and women, and the idea that we can't find someone without the baggage that he has is preposterous.
The job that he's up for is essentially the management job of the Pentagon, isn't that right?
Absolutely. It's the man who makes the trains run on time. It's the man who coordinates and administers the Pentagon. And it's the man who makes sure that procurement decisions and acquisition decisions and so forth meet the final test. And a man coming in with the baggage he's coming in with, we've got to be able to find someone else. Especially
if there is going to be big change inside the Defense Department and in the relationship between the Defense Department and the other elements of the American government. I have been thinking that the resistance to those changes is probably going to come from the defense industry, since they're the ones who have the most to gain from the system staying the way it is. And he's really, really tied into the defense industry, right?
You bet. One of the big ones, Raytheon.
All right. Well, moving on. Thank you. The Obama administration pushed back today on complaints that a review of the Army Field Manual could result in the addition of techniques that have been derided as torture during the last administration. Do you think there was a torture loophole? What do you think of these new Army Field Manual regulations?
Well, the Army Field Manual is compliant with Geneva, and so compliant with domestic law and with the International Convention Against Torture. I think what we have here is a bureaucratic battle going on between the CIA and the Pentagon, because the CIA does not want to have a Pentagon-produced item, the Army Field Manual, be its guide. So we get around this bureaucratic battle by simply developing a guideline for the CIA that's not the Army Field Manual, but essentially incorporates the same principles.
Is it possible that the CIA could have rules that were called CIA-only rules that didn't have the imprimatur of the military on them, but essentially required the same thing of CIA officers that were required of other interrogators?
Absolutely. As far as I can tell, from 1947 forward, we've had that.
The New York Times today reported that a Saudi national, this guy Saeed al-Shiri, was released from Guantanamo, has now ended up in al-Qaeda in Yemen. Some folks are jumping from that information to the conclusion that Guantanamo ought to stay open. I don't see it that way, since he ended up going back to Yemen while Guantanamo was still open. Do you feel like there is a connection between those two arguments?
We have in Guantanamo what we in the Army euphemistically call a goat rope. We put people in Guantanamo who weren't guilty of anything except being swept up at the time. In fact, the preponderance of the people in Guantanamo were that way. Secretary Powell, his legal advisor Will Taft, Gordon England, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Dr. Rice, her legal advisor John Bellinger, everyone has wanted to close Guantanamo and has, I think, understood the basic way that one should close Guantanamo. But that said, the problems were created in the beginning by having too few troops in Afghanistan, too few troops in Iraq, not vetting on the battlefield, not vetting when they got to Guantanamo, and simply keeping people incarcerated who, in their preponderance, as I said, were innocent. Now, I understand the specifics of this release you referred to, were that the gentleman was repatriated to Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
He went through a rehabilitation program in Saudi Arabia, and then he was released. Well, if you're going to repatriate someone to Saudi Arabia, you better be darn sure that he doesn't meet your criteria for being a terrorist, because 5 times out of 6, he's going to go right back into a country like Yemen or wherever, and he's going to do what he was doing before, if he was, in fact, a terrorist. I wouldn't discount the fact that he spent so long in Guantanamo as an innocent individual that he now feels like being a terrorist, because that's what Guantanamo is. It's a creator, not a stopper or incarceration point for terrorists. It's a creator of terrorists. How would you feel if you stayed in prison for 6 years and you had done nothing but maybe incur the wrath of a Pakistani or a Taliban or an Afghan or a Pashtun or whatever who decided he'd turn you in, not only to solve the problem he had with you, but also to gain a $5,000 bonus? That's how we gained a lot of the members who are down there in Guantanamo right now.
It's a way to mint radicals if we didn't have one before.
Yeah.
Colonel Larry Wilkerson, retired U.S. Army Colonel, former Chief of Staff to Secretary of State General Colin Powell. Really happy to have you on the show. We'd love to have you back out whenever you could, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.